This is Holden. This is the seasonal podcast, and we're talking about our number one games.
Fuck it.
I don't know if you want to. I totally just went on a whim with that.
Yeah, it's pretty late right now, but last episode of the podcast a couple weeks ago, the third Friday of March, we went through most of our top 10 games of all time. We went through a few honorable mentions, a few random extra ones, including some like childhood nostalgia games and some of our favorites generally, and we went all the way up to number 2. This time, we're talking specifically our number 1 favorite game of all time.
Dedicating a podcast to our number 1 favorite game.
Yeah, so that we could have
time to talk about it and
kind of explore a little bit. Because like a few games on the list last time, a couple weeks ago, were we talked about for a couple minutes. Some of them we talked for 5 or 10 minutes, depending on which one they were. So this one is meant to be more like we can talk about each one of these games for 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
And if that works out for us. So we went through the order of Lane going through his first and me through mine. And I think we can kind of go through that and that'll work for us easily this time because your favorite game I haven't played, but my favorite game you have.
True.
Which of course we hinted at. I think both of these were technically hinted at in the last video, although one of them more explicitly than the other.
Yeah.
So Lane, what's your number 1 favorite game of all time?
Drum roll. It's a shocker, Skyrim.
Yeah, so one of his honorable mentions in the last list was
Elder Scrolls Online.
And
for the lore.
Yeah, and that specified.
And I didn't even talk about any other Elder Scrolls games that I played. I just talked about Elder Scrolls Online for the lore.
Exactly. So the fact that no other games, like no Morrowind, no Oblivion, nothing like that, were on the actual list, people who notice him say Elder Scrolls Online and clarify the lore probably thought that one of these games would end up at the top.
Yeah.
And obviously, Skyrim is one of the most well-known and beloved games.
It's the game that got me into the Elder Scrolls.
Yeah, and aside from GTA 5 and Resident Evil 4, it has had the most releases of basically any game.
Oh my god, yeah. They released it on Alexa. They did. They released
this a meme?
No, they released the game on Alexa.
I want to die.
I was thinking
in game.
But yeah, it's had a lot of releases. But I've been playing the game. I didn't play it when it first came out. I played it in 2013.
Yeah, that was a couple years after it came out.
Yeah, it came out.
That was still early on in its life cycle.
Yeah, I remember playing it for the first time on Xbox 360, and later on PS3, then PS4, and now PS5.
Okay.
And because of the release of Anniversary Edition.
Yeah.
But just the first time you play that game, waking up on that carriage.
Which is an iconic moment. Even somebody who's never played the game knows that.
There's memes of it.
Like it is the quintessential Skyrim meme.
Yeah. The game is just, if you're into like that medieval fantasy magic, it has dragons. I mean, like, if you're into those fantasy games, Skyrim is definitely one of the best. It's a great role-playing game. It's the combat, not the best. But
yeah, it's like, I've heard it's relatively clunky combat, but it's serviceable. Like,
yeah, it is a lot.
It doesn't make the game better, but it doesn't make it worse.
Yeah, and
it exists. The combat exists.
The combat exists, but the game itself, the story, the story is really what makes it. You're the Dragonborn. You find that out because dragons come to Tamriel. They have returned after so many thousand years. Alduin, the World Eater.
Sounds very much like Dark Souls names.
Yeah, Alduin, the World Eater, has returned, and you, the Dragonborn, with the blessing from Akatosh, is the only one that can defeat him, and that's just the main quest. The amount of side quests in this game is insane. I've probably put thousands of hours into this game, and I'm still finding new shit to do. And the main story is pretty good. You defeat Alduin, and you're kind of like the hero of this world. And the Dragonborn, he's not exactly That's my cats.
Is that your cats? It
Yeah.
sounded almost like
They're
whistles.
whining because we've been in here for a couple hours and they need attention all the time.
I'm not sorry, Thor. Wait, neither of those are Thor.
Thor, no.
Oh, they are Thor and Odin. Loki's never mind.
Loki's the other cat.
Yeah, Loki's the other cat.
I don't know how to explain this game because
I mean, you can kind of go into your feelings and stuff. I mean, I'm just gonna say I haven't played Skyrim. I haven't played any Elder Rules. Elder Rules. They're old bed rolls. I haven't played any of this or any Elder Scrolls, but I did. I want to say it was in like whenever it was that I actually bought Dad of War, which I can't remember when it was. It was sometime in early to mid 2020, probably like late spring, early summer of 2020 or something like that. I bought Skyrim Special Edition on sale for like $10 on my PS4. So I have the free PS5 upgrade as well now.
Right.
And I'm trying to decide whether I want to play on there or if I'm gonna, play on PC. But the main thing is on PC. If I was gonna play on PC, I want to have all the quality of life improvement mods and all that shit. But the problem is that with the anniversary update, even though it's a paid update and it's a different stuff going on with that, there was an update to the special edition game itself that I think may have already broken all the mods. So I'm just kind of waiting time to see.
I haven't noticed too many broken things about it because I restarted it with the anniversary edition, but I haven't noticed too many bugs or anything broken too much.
At least not broken in a way that any Bethesda games aren't already broken because.
Well, them being broken is just part of what makes Bethesda special.
Yeah, which you can be lenient with or you can choose to not be, but it depends. Right. By the time you get to Fallout 76, it's a little bit of a different story. But
apparently it's a good game now since they've released so many.
Well, except that you have to pay a subscription for it.
Really? My friends were wanting me to download it again because they got it, and I was just like, no.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
But when you first enter the game, the world is just massive. You escaped getting beheaded, headed over to the next town, Riverwood.
You don't have to explain all the stories.
Well, no,
I still have to experience, but yeah.
Just how massive the world is. Looking up at it's a game that you can just look into see the mountains, you can hear birds in the background and whatnot, and seeing all these different cities and whatnot, and just you can see something and you can travel to that place. It was like my first game where I was like, I can see that mountain over there. I can go to that mountain and explore it.
And I think for a lot of people who hadn't had that experience, Breath of the Wild was something that gave a lot of people that.
Yeah.
You see that, you can go there.
And Skyrim was my first game that was like that.
Yeah, and that's fair. Like, I absolutely do need to spend time. Like, I was initially wanting to wait to do these top 10 lists until I had gotten a chance to play Skyrim so that we could talk more about it. But I definitely...
You need...
Like, I get where the hype is because it's the type of game that I feel like I would enjoy playing. I just don't know if I would.
Well, there's different.
Like
there's
I
so
would
many
probably
ways to play
like
it.
I would probably spend a few hundred hours, basically 100%ing it as much as I could possibly get.
Try 1,000 hours to 100%.
Some people can.
True.
The completionist completed it in just a couple hundred hours, like 100,
so
like
wild.
Everything. Well, I spent 195 hours in Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
I didn't even know you 100%ed that game.
I got the platinum and 100%ed everything, including all 7 DLC.
Yeah.
So I could probably do it with Skyrim, but the problem is when I play a game, especially when it comes to open world big games like that, I have to play them until I'm done with them.
Right.
And when the longer they are, the more I get sick of it. Like I don't get sick of it while I'm playing, but after I'm done, I never want to touch it. Like that's my problem with Odyssey, Assassin's Creed. I really liked playing that game, but after 195 hours played in it in 1 month, doing everything, I don't want to touch Assassin's Creed again in my entire life.
That's fair. I haven't played any of this.
But so I'm a little bit worried about something like that happening when I play Skyrim. Because when I play games and I get through to a certain point and stop, I find it exceedingly difficult to pick up where I left off.
Right.
Especially when it comes to anything that has any form of challenge in combat. Because I get rusty with controls and stuff virtually immediately.
You won't have that issue with Skyrim. The combat is so simple and not that difficult. Depending on your play style, because you can go in, you can play as a mage and just do magic. You can do two-handed weapons. You can do a shield and a sword. You can be heavy armor, light armor, mage clothing. I mean, there's different ways to play the game.
And to a certain extent, having a lot of options like that almost makes it harder for me, because then I don't know where to go.
At the same time, you can always switch in the middle of your game.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's not necessarily that I'm worried about the game being hard. It's just that if I stop in the middle when I pick back up, I'm going to be so rusty that if I have any form of struggle when I come back to it, it's going to be like, well, I don't really feel like playing.
That's fair.
I have a huge problem with stopping games in the middle and then coming back, and deciding to just restart because it's easier.
Right.
And then continuing to not finish. But either way, like, Skyrim is a game that I definitely want to play and need to play for sure.
The story's great. The DLCs are pretty good. The Hearthfire DLC, and
are there 2 or 3 of them?
There's 3.
Okay.
There's the Dawnguard, the Dragonborn, and Hearthfire.
Okay.
If I had to rank them,
it's Witcher 3 that has 2 DLC.
Yeah, I haven't played The Witcher 3 yet. Been meaning to. Heard it's really good. But
same. Like, if I had played The Witcher 3, especially since I'm a story guy and I love open world games,
I'm sure that would be.
I'm sure that would be one of my top ones, but because I haven't played it yet.
Hearthfire comes in 3rd for DLCs because it just gives you the ability to build houses, and that's it. That's the DLC.
Oh, that's the deal. Okay.
You build houses on different properties. My second one would be the Dragonborn DLC. Great story because you are not the first Dragonborn to ever roam Tamriel.
Okay, so it's kind of going into some of that history and stuff.
Yeah. Damn, guys, don't knock down the door. And then my all-time favorite DLC is the Dawnguard DLC. Because Dawnguard are a group of people that are basically vampire hunters. And then you have the vampires. There's a vampire lord, Lord Harkin, and you get to choose which side you want to fight for. And Skyrim is so good with your different choices. It doesn't determine the outcome of the game by any means too much. But like with the Dawnguard DLC, you can fight with the vampire, or you can fight with the Dawnguard and kill vampires, or you can become a vampire lord. And being a vampire lord, you turn into this big like gargoyle dude, and it's amazing. I'm not gonna lie. And one of the main reasons why it's my favorite is because it expands on the map. Well, so does Dragonborn DLC, but Serana, she is my absolute favorite character.
All right.
Backstory is tragic, but
isn't Skyrim, like most Bethesda games, one where it gives you like the full line of the dialogue that you would say, but when you select it, there's no words, it's just the dialogue. So there's no voice actor for your character.
There's no
okay.
Voice actor.
See,
it helps you.
I like RPGs that do that. I don't know if I've actually played an RPG that does that, but I like the idea of that better than having, a few options where it's like a summary of what your character would say, but then you say it, but then there's a voice actor that says a line. It's just like, well, that's not what I wanted to say with that option.
Right.
Like, that's what a lot of quote-unquote RPGs do, is they give you an option. It's just like, yes, no, maybe, and then you select one, and then it has a sentence. It's just like, well, that's not what I would have said.
Right.
So I kind of like the idea of Bethesda games having the full option of what you're saying, but it's not spoken out. It's taken as if you say it.
And it makes it a really good role-playing game.
Exactly. So you can have the option of truly deciding, this is what I want to say out of these options, rather than this is the idea I want to convey, but then, okay, I didn't actually want to say that.
No, it gives
because that happens.
Sometimes it's like, a little mini paragraph of what you're going to say, or a couple sentences. And, they vary. You can be rude, sympathetic, that type of thing. Depending on the character.
Christ.
They're getting restless. Huh? Anyways, but it really helps with the immersion of the game, and you can fall in love with the characters. I think they only had a handful of voice actors, so some of the voices might sound a little similar, but the game does really good with the dialogue aspect of it. And it's part of the game I like is you can go into a room or a library and they just have books. There's probably hundreds of books in that game that you can just read through for the history of Tamriel and whatnot. And
my problem is that I like to do everything like that.
You could read all the books,
and
that would take you 100 hours in this.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like,
But when I don't know,
it's almost like I would prefer to just have some really good Elder Scrolls history and lore videos, because Elder Scrolls lore, as far as I've been made aware, yeah, exactly. And I've heard that Elder Scrolls lore is also very inconsistent in the sense that between games, like it's not meant to be like a timeline thing. It's not meant to be a thing where things happen and here's history and here's lore. It's meant to be like you kind of put things together, but there's no right answer.
Kind of, and that's also what makes it special, though.
Yeah, and
each
that's
game
something that I'm
is-
also a little mediocre on. But I mean,
Right.
I have for some reason I have a hard time with interpretation unless it's like a book, like
Right.
an actual just 200,000 word book.
Well, in each Elder Scrolls games, you can kind of come up with your own theories of what happens after your character finishes doing this thing. And I love that. I love being able to let my imagination just wander of like what I would, me as the Dragonborn, basically being a demigod amongst these men. You're mortal.
Mere mortals.
Yeah, but you're mortal. You have mortal years to live, but you're basically a demigod. And granted, the game does not let you act like a demigod because there's some enemies that can just whoop your fucking ass. But the history, it is, if you like you said,
it's not a cut and dry. Here is the history of the game.
There are some parts that are like that, but
there's a lot of interpretation.
Yeah, a lot of interpretation.
And I mean, like, I can completely respect it, and I don't know how much I would like it or not. It's mostly just that since I am a completionist and I like to do everything, I find it hard to want to commit the time to learning something that is up to me to decide. So it's like, do I want to spend my creativity trying to put together the pieces of this game, or do I want to spend my creativity making my own world?
Right. Well, and yeah, but I forgot what I was going to say. Hold on. The story itself is enough to suffice. You don't even have to, imagine.
And that's absolutely fair. That's one of the other reasons why I want to play it on PC instead of on console, is because there are some story mods. For example, the Forgotten City.
Yeah.
Very famous, probably one of the most famous mods, period, of all time for any game.
Right.
One of the most downloaded. Like, I would love to play Elder Scroll, like play Skyrim, with some of these UI and bug fix mods and stuff like that, but then also add on extra mods that aren't technically part of the game just because there are more stuff for me to do.
PC, I've played enough of the original game that I'm going to get that mod that makes dragons like Thomas the Tank Engine.
I wouldn't do mods like that. I'm not.
And
that
I would
weird.
just do some silly fucking mods, but I don't know. The Dawn Guard DLC is my favorite, just because I love Serana and her backstory is really. I think I showed you a video showing her backstory.
Yeah, you did.
Really fucking tragic and
really fucked up.
Really fucked up, and I mean the Elder Scrolls can get fucking dark. It really can. So some of the Daedric princes and whatnot, the lore can get really dark.
But the other question is Skyrim, or does Elder Scrolls overall remain lighthearted in a way? This is something we'll get into later with my game, but like I like when things are dark, but also aren't just darkness.
Right.
Like there's.
It really depends, because the history of Tamriel, I mean.
Like things that aren't afraid to get heavy, but remains light. That's kind of the thing that I'm going for with my books, is I want to write stories that at times can get heavy and can get sad and can get dark and sometimes get like, I don't know how fucked up I'm willing to get with these books, but there are probably going to be some instances of history in some of the stories that are really fucked up, like not in a grim dark type of way, but just like, okay, this is not the same story as I was reading 5 pages ago, but
it does
at its soul remains lighthearted, because that's how I am. Like I'm
It is
an
pretty
optimist.
lighthearted,
For some
actually.
reason, when it comes to my storytelling, I'm an optimist, even though I am a natural pessimist. I think it's part of my yin yang.
Right.
Just me counteracting the part of me that is just eternally negative.
Well, I think it does remain fairly lighthearted, because like Serana, when you ask her about her past or whatnot, she's like, that's something I don't want to revisit, and then you just continue on a normal conversation. And
I mean, like, I'm not suggesting that Skyrim is like dark game, but
No, it's a fun, fantasy adventure game.
Like, I was just curious if it like kind of balances that.
There's some things that like you can read some of the books. There's some things that you experience in the game that at first are just like, cool, that happened, but when you read a bit more into it, it's like, okay.
I like that kind of stuff.
Okay.
When you learn about or hear about certain things, like even fleetingly in a certain cutscene, but then things are expanded upon later, or you learn certain things and you're just like, wait, that meant something.
Yeah.
Like I was talking about last video with Dad of War. Like, after having played that game once, the first hour of the game has so much foreshadowing in it, it is not even funny.
Yeah.
Like the whole first hour is foreshadowing somehow.
Yeah. And I don't know if Skyrim does a whole lot of foreshadowing, but
just having those kind of clues and tie-ins and stuff like that.
Yeah, and
especially since the way that I'm writing my books, there's multiple series and several of them are take place at the same time. They're all in the same world and whatnot.
Right.
Like there are plenty of hints and stuff that I'm trying to work into the stories to drop that matter for other books, and once you get to those books and or reread some of these other ones, it's going to make more sense, and some of those things are going to click and be like, oh shit, this had implications for this series that I didn't even realize, or these characters are connected in a way that didn't make sense. Like I like interwoven and connected stuff that you don't realize is interwoven or connected until you dig into it.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I like about the Elder Scrolls, not just Skyrim, but the community expands upon the lore. You know, like
the way that it's interpretive.
Yeah. They give you, I mean, they play, Bethesda places all these, things down for you, but you can interpret it your own way. And some things, like, everything has history to it. Like the city of Whiterun has a lot of history to it. The Skyrim in general has a lot of history. The choice, like picking what side of the Civil War, because there's a Civil War going on in Skyrim, and picking what side you want. I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is. Well, actually, they did the Civil War in such a great way because there is no right side. Each side is...
Yeah, you don't want there to be conflict and for there to be clear cut, especially when you have a decision.
Right.
Like there's a certain moral quandary that you love. War? Don't, but there's a certain quality to being able to decide in a moral quandary.
For the longest time, I was with the Stormcloaks up until recently. I chose the Imperials. And
I'm pretty sure you told me about this when you told me like the backstory of the one girl.
Well, yeah, the Stormcloaks are noble in their own right. They want to be an independent. They want Skyrim to be an independent state, basically. But they're racist because they only want the Nords. Nords are humans.
Oh yeah, you explained some of this.
But the Imperials ban worship of Talos, which is the god that Stormcloaks worship, and they're accepting of all races, but they're banning worship of this one god, and then
so there's inherent problems with both.
There's positives and negatives on each side. The only reason I switched to Imperials is because I hate the Thalmor, and the only one that's able to stand up against them is the Imperials, and we need Skyrim, in one piece to be able to take on the Thalmor.
That's fair. But...
And when you play the game, you'll understand why the Thalmor are just hated.
The question is, would you call Skyrim a 10 out of 10 game?
9.5.
Yeah, see, God of War is a 10 out of 10, but that doesn't mean it has to be the favorite.
No.
Like, there can be difference between some objective qualities. And
I mean, it's pretty close to a 10 out of 10 just because I do have a big imagination, and I can imagine, even if it's not happening in game, I imagine my character doing these things and being this hero, being this person that helps.
That's what I find so weird about me, is that I am an inherently imaginative and creative person.
Right.
But because of a lot of factors, school being one of the top ones, my imagination died.
Mine died too.
So when it comes to creating like interpretations, stuff like that with things that I'm given, I have a very hard time with that, even though I can create my own shit very well.
Right.
So,
but
who knows?
It's a great game. I can just get lost in the role play. Like I can put myself into that character and what I would do in this situation and whatnot. And being the Dragonborn is badass because you are destined to become the emperor, the High King of Tamriel, and rule with like an iron fist. Because the Dragonborns in the past have done that. They are destined to sit on the throne and rule. So, but yeah, if you play Skyrim and enjoy it, I highly recommend Elder Scrolls Online. Just because you can play it alone and just get lore out of it.
Yeah, and I mean, have Morrowind and Oblivion on my PC as well, and I remember watching one of my brothers play a few hours of Oblivion at one point in time several years ago,
Right.
and I really liking what I watched. Like there are some scenes in there still that stick in my brain.
Right.
That I'd love to have expanded upon, but like I want to play Skyrim. Don't get me wrong. It's just it might be a while. Like I honestly kind of want to play Witcher 3 first.
I want to, but just how massive that game is, and I looked up how long it takes to complete it. I'm like, I don't have.
It'll probably take me 300 hours.
That's like, I don't know if I have the time to commit to a game like that.
I don't. But I want to play Witcher 3 very soon.
Skyrim's one of those games that you can play, for a week straight and then drop for 6 months and then pick back up again.
Yeah. And I need more games like that because, just my schedule. I mean, doing this podcast and all my other video work and all my other series and my job. Like, if I didn't have my job, if my job was being able to do all this stuff, which maybe someday it will be, most likely not. But if this was my job, and I suddenly wasn't spending, 4 to 6 hours of my day just doing stuff at work and being able to use that with other stuff, then that'd be nice. But
if I wasn't spending 8 to 10 hours a day almost every day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky with my job being able to do what I do because I can still write and do stuff like that there, which is nice. But it would be nice to not be at work and be able to be home and do some other stuff too. But so that's your number one. And then last week on the list, his number 5 was The Last of Us. And I mentioned we'll talk about this a little bit later, and we never did because this is my number 1. The Last of Us is just legendary. Yeah. Like when you have a game that is on, when it comes to having dozens of game publications and game reviewers and independent reviewers and video reviewers and all these people, when you have dozens, if not hundreds of people who put this game in the top 10, if not the top 5, sometimes many, many times top 3 games of the 2010s decade. And probably the majority, like when you all said and done, probably the majority have them in the top 3. Yeah. Most of those, number 1 of the entire decade. It kind of tells you something.
Yeah. It really
because here's the deal. The Last of Us is not a perfect game. Mm-hmm. The gameplay doesn't work for some people.
Right.
It's serviceable for some people. It's not good for others. And there are a variety of bugs and glitches. And there are a couple of bugs where a couple trophies just don't proc, which bothers me. As a trophy hunter and a completionist, it bugs me that a couple trophies that I have gotten, I don't have because they don't proc.
Yeah.
But the reason that The Last of Us is so good is because of the story.
Yeah, the story is...
Despite amazing. It not being a perfect game, it is one of my favorite games to play. If I want to play a game, but don't know what to play, I just go to The Last of Us. Even if I'm just starting a new playthrough and just playing for a few hours.
Right.
It's The Last of Us. For some reason, the gameplay hooks with me enough that I just want to play it. And I know all of the layouts of everything. So I don't enjoy playing on hard difficulties, and I haven't played it on anything except for this first half in hard. And I'm not really enjoying it as much as playing it on just easy or normal because, the story is the main thing, but I enjoy, just plowing through stuff in the gameplay. I don't enjoy being the scavenger. I enjoy just, picking shit up and shooting people. So, but the story of The Last of Us is what makes it a perfect game. Because I mentioned this I think I mentioned this a couple episodes ago in the No Way Home discussion that we did, that bonus episode for the MCU review, that like The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the scene, spoiler alert, the scene when Gwen dies, Andrew Spider-Man fails to save her, that's probably my favorite movie scene of all time. If not, it's at least in the top 3. And despite watching that movie several times, probably 5 or 6 times, I've cried every single time. The opening sequence of The Last of Us is very similar.
It made me cry. I did not expect to in the beginning of a game,
And yes, in the first half hour, like the opening sequence, has made me cry every time.
Yeah.
Only one. So the amount of times that I've played through that opening sequence, plus the amount of times that I've watched other people play the game and go through that opening sequence, probably totals to about 13-ish times, give or take one or two.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time I've experienced that opening sequence, all but once, I have cried. The only reason I did not cry one time was because I had just played through it and then 4 hours later was watching someone play the game.
Mm.
And because they were so close to each other, I didn't cry. This most recent time that I've started playing through on hard, I cried, actively trying not to. It is, when it comes to the most perfect opening sequence of a game, The Last of Us has it. There's virtually no gameplay.
Yeah.
But what happens in it is so impactful. And it mattered to me very much playing it for the first time because I expected this to be a Walking Dead-esque, just zombie fest game that didn't mean anything except for, hopping onto the train of zombies.
Right.
Because it came out about in that time.
And I was all on board with
Yeah,
zombies.
yeah. And
I loved it. My friends and I prepared for a zombie apocalypse.
yeah, and I mean, fair reason. But the thing is, even The Last of Us has its own take on this. It's not just zombies.
No, they're scarier than zombies.
Like these are so much more creative than zombies.
Yeah.
And so, like we mentioned last episode, Lane, when he got a new PS4 and gave me his old one, the new PS4 came with a disc copy of The Last of Us. And since he already owned the game, he let me take it. And I was like, what the fuck is this? A zombie game? I don't give a shit. But on the copy of it, it says over 200 Game of Year awards. And I'm like, that means something.
Yeah.
Like, zombies were a craze, but 200 Game of the Year awards, that is significant. So I was like, fuck it, I'll play this game. And going through that opening sequence changed me.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, this isn't just a stupid zombie game. This is going to do something.
Yeah.
And none of the rest of the story disappoints.
Nope.
Everything about it just works so well for me. Like, I don't want to go on forever and ever and ever in this episode because it's my dream to be able to make like a 3 or 4 hour video on The Last of Us just explaining why it is a perfect game and just making it just this very well scripted, written and rewritten 15 times script that explains exactly how I feel about this game.
Right.
But I'm going to try to talk about a lot of that stuff here because it just works so well. When it comes to voice acting and dialogue and even just motion capture,
right,
one of the most perfect out there. Like, very few games compare. Even The Last of Us 2's acting and voice actors and stuff like that did a phenomenal job. But this game has an impact. Dad of War compares very closely in terms of voice acting and performance.
Yeah.
But The Last of Us still shoots it out somehow.
Yeah.
And on that note, when you come into actors and performances, the characters are somehow the most lovable characters in any form of medium I've ever experienced, despite many of them being flawed in ways that you should hate them. This was something that I just brought up in the Skyrim. I was like, well, is it dark but not afraid? Like, is it not afraid to get dark but still lighthearted? The Last of Us draws this balance in this line perfectly.
Yeah.
This was one thing that the sequel did terribly because it was just a gore fest. It was torture porn. It was just dark and dark and dark. There was no lightheartedness to it. Part of what worked for The Last of Us so much was the relationships, the dynamics, and that it was bright at times.
Yeah.
Certain characters were enjoyable to be around. When you meet Sam and Henry, they're fun characters when they get to the tower. Yeah. And they're talking about the Harley. That's fun. Ellie is a funny character. Ellie is fucking hilarious.
I really liked Ellie.
Like, there's many interactions between Joel and Ellie, especially later on when their relationship is closer, that are just straight up funny. there's humor, there's lightheartedness, there's hope in this game in a way that the sequel didn't have. And a lot of that tonal quality is what makes this game so good. Because it's dark. It is a dark game. There are some very heavy themes. There are some very heavy scenes that just hurt. Like we just mentioned, Sam and Henry. The scene in the morning of the tower hurts. Like, I'm getting chills thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Every single time I go through that scene, I'm just like, fuck. Mm-hmm. It's an emotional gut punch, and this game delivers those in droves. If there's any game that can hook you emotionally, The Last of Us does it better than any. Because you can have a story with great lore, like the Skyrim. But when you're going for a straightforward, here's your story, few games deliver in a way that The Last of Us does.
Yeah.
Marvel's Spider-Man and Dad of War have great stories, but The Last of Us has an emotional tie-in, even in a way that Dad of War doesn't.
Right.
Because even though Dad of War has got some pretty heart-wrenching scenes in it, there's nothing like The Last of Us. We mentioned briefly last episode, The Last of Us has probably the best ending of any story in any medium.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was because it ended on a tone of question. There was no certainty to it.
Right.
You didn't know what was going to happen. Like, it didn't need a sequel, even though you didn't know precisely what happened in the ending.
Right.
One of the best parts of The Last of Us is the relational dynamic between Ellie and Joel. Even as other characters come and go, like Bill, like Tess, like Sam and Henry, Joel and Ellie together, I don't know if there's any better, like, companionship in a story. Like, just something about the relationship and how it grows and changes.
Yeah.
In the beginning, they don't want anything to fucking do with each other. They hate each other. As they continue to go across and are in Pittsburgh and whatnot, which is probably the longest section of the game.
Right.
You see a lot of tension. You see a lot of problems. When they are with Bill, there's a lot of arguing.
Yeah.
But then after Sam and Henry, their relationship starts to grow a little bit more because of the way that Sam and Henry are. And they grow closer together. Joel and Ellie do. And then after Sam and Henry die, and like I said, that emotional gut punch hits, Joel and Ellie, you're jumped to Jackson after that, to the fall. So there's several months.
Yeah.
A period of time. There's a couple months in between these characters dying and then these being in Jackson. So what happened? Well, you didn't need to experience all of that.
Right.
Because just the way that Joel and Ellie talk when you're in Jackson and you're looking for Tommy, you see the way that they've grown just in the way they're talking. There's still tension, though, because at one point in the game you can come across a grave. And Ellie will say, I forgot to put the toy robot in Sam's grave because it was something that she had stolen from the one store for him because Henry told him he couldn't have it. She wanted to bury it with him. So you come across this little kid's grave in Jackson, and just this little moment, she's like, I forgot to put this, and Joel doesn't want to talk about it, but Ellie says, I want to talk about it, and he gets upset. There's still tension.
Right.
But they're more friendly. And this kind of dynamic you continue to see over and over. Even more so when at the end of this section in Jackson when Ellie runs off. When Joel tries to dump her off. And you kind of see this betrayal that Ellie feels and you understand it. And she runs off and Joel decides against it after they've had this argument. One of the best scenes in all the gaming is when Joel and Ellie are in the house, like the ranch house.
Yeah.
And they have the argument where Ellie just wants him to admit that he wanted to get rid of her. And she brings up Sarah, who died in that opening sequence. This scene is so good.
Yeah.
And then things start to click in Joel's head. Like, I can go on and on But Joel and Ellie's relationship and the dynamic of it is the most perfect relationship you can have in any medium. Like the closest that you can get with a relationship like this is in a book. You can't get this in a movie because you don't have this much time to spend. Like maybe in a TV show, maybe, but TV shows did generally have a broader scope than two characters.
Yeah.
And most movies and franchises and stuff like that have a broader scope than two characters. So this one game that is focused primarily on a relationship between two people with the hope that one of those people can save humanity, there's just nothing like it.
Yeah.
Like, the craziest thing about The Last of Us story is that it is not unique. It is not new.
Right.
There have been plenty of stories that have done things like it.
Apocalypse.
Especially the idea of zombies and apocalypse. Even though the way that The Last of Us does zombies is unique, the story itself is not unique. But the characters are wholly unique, and their interactions are just perfect. Like there's nothing more perfect than this. And even when you get to the winter sections and you play as Ellie, big ballsy move to have you playing as Joel for 10 hours and then you're playing as Ellie for 3 or 4.
Yeah.
It was a big risk and it paid off because then you got to see Ellie grow by herself, especially as she's fighting to keep Joel alive. Like their relation has just gotten to a point where this desire for her to keep him alive as a father figure takes hold, because that's when she starts seeing him that way. And you have not all of The Last of Us villains are fantastic, but David is a very good villain.
Yeah.
Horrible fucking person.
Yes.
Cannibal and a pedophile and
yeah,
all of these things, and just trying to lure Ellie into unspeakable things. Like, this game isn't afraid to get dark, but it doesn't show you this.
Yeah.
And somehow the way that it does even David as a villain is fantastic. And when Ellie kills him, one of the best scenes.
Yeah, that scene got to me.
It got to me because Ellie grows in the sense that she doesn't like the death. She doesn't like the killing, but she learns to do it as a form of necessity.
Yeah.
This was something that the sequel got wrong. So that she starts to have this bloodlust, which, considering some of the themes that they were trying to go for, kind of makes sense. But when you remember how she was in this game, there are lines in this game where you as Joel, if you kill someone, sometimes she'll say Jesus Joel because it was so brutal or something like that. Like,
yeah.
This, because she doesn't like it, but she learns that you have to do it sometimes. So when she finally takes the reins and kills David herself, and Joel's there, and it just kind of goes into silence with the music, but you can't hear what they're saying. You didn't need them to say anything. You didn't need to hear what they're saying. You just needed them to be together.
Yeah.
And for him to have been better to find her and save her when she was trying to save him. Just the dynamic. And finding the fireflies and the ambiguity of the ending. Like, you didn't need the sequel.
Yeah.
Because the sequel, I don't know how, the sequel didn't retcon the ending, but it retconned a couple elements of the ending and the importance of it. But thankfully, this first game is still fine the way that it is. But
right.
The point is, there's a moral quandary and a moral ambiguity to the end of The Last of Us that really makes a player think without forcing them to do anything about it. If there were to be no sequel to The Last of Us, which there wasn't for 7 years, well, 6.5 years, you didn't need that ending because it was all about the question. Whether you agreed with it or not, you thought about it.
Yeah.
Would you have done what Joel did? Well, I don't know. But would you have not done what Joel did? And that's the question.
Yeah.
You don't know if you agree with it, but you don't know if you don't.
Right.
So, I've been going on, just talking about this, but there is so much about The Last of Us in the story that I just cannot get over. Like every single time I play this game, I get chills over and over in different scenes.
Right.
Things that I know are coming but still hurt. Scenes that I know are coming but still get to me, just chills and, just the stress and everything. Even if the gameplay was all cut out and it was all just a movie.
The show. Is it a show or a movie coming out?
I'm pretty sure it's a show.
I hope they do.
I hope it's fine. Like, I hope it does justice.
Yeah.
My main concern is that since Neil Druckmann's the one writing it, and, The Last of Us 2 got Game of the Year. Whether it deserved it or not is a question in and of itself, but the fact that Neil Druckmann did what he did and got away with it, it makes you wonder what he's going to do with the show. But even if the show sucks, the first game always exists.
Yeah.
And then there's the DLC.
The DLC was pretty
Left Behind, which some people think is better than the base game. And when the base game is as good as it is, that says a lot.
Yeah.
And part of the glory of the DLC is similar to why Spider-Man PS4's DLC is so good. It's a DLC that exists because it's part of the story that's good and important and nice to have,
right?
But isn't required for the main story. I mean, Spider-Man's takes place after the fact, and The Last of Us takes place during the game with some flashbacks from before. But the way that it utilizes the DLC is perfect. Because once you play the DLC and you replay The Last of Us, there are several scenes or several lines that Ellie says, several questions that she's asked and answers, or answers in a certain way, that directly reference stuff that you learn in Left Behind. And makes her story in the first half of The Last of Us even more tragic.
Yeah.
Because half of Left Behind is flashbacks from before the game, like leading more or less right up to when you meet her.
Yeah.
Not necessarily more or less right up, but leading up to the approximate month time period when you meet her in the base game. And like the day before that, like that whole day is part of the game. The other half of the game is her is other sections of her during the winter of The Last of Us. Because The Last of Us, you take control of Ellie, but not all of everything that happens with her is shown.
Right.
The rest of what happens with her, it basically just trying to make sure that Joel is stable.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the fall, you're at the college campus, Joel falls onto this spike, something that's sticking out of the ground, and severely injures him. The next time that the game starts, Joel's fine in a garage and Ellie's out hunting. There's a few days time in between those.
Yeah.
The rest of Left Behind takes place in that period. And you get more story for what happens in between these two things. And there's a lot of parallels between her relationship with Riley in the DLC that compare with her relationship with Joel and why she's doing what she's doing. That also came up in the argument she had in the ranch house.
Yeah.
Like when Joel says, you have no idea what loss is. And she says, everybody I've cared about has either died or left me. Because he doesn't know about Riley.
Yeah.
And like everything just works so perfectly. Like I can't get over this game. I've played this game all the way through 7 times, I think. I've played through part of it 8 or 9 times. Like I'm working through a hard playthrough, but I don't know how much further I'm going to go. I just like playing it on easy and normal more just because, I don't have to worry about things.
Right.
Like I just like to mindlessly brain people.
Right.
Mindlessly brain people and cry. But like you haven't really said much because you kind of said some of your feelings when we talked about it last episode.
Right.
As your number 5. And I didn't want to go into it too much because I'd be going into it here, but like
10 out of 10 game.
Like easily.
Yeah.
Like the gameplay isn't perfect. It isn't a perfect game, but it is a perfect game.
Yeah. And that makes sense.
Like there are flaws, especially with bugs and stuff like that. One time I had Ellie T-pose through a few pipes because the animations didn't proc.
Did you ever have a bug in Spider-Man at the beginning of the game where who's that guy you fight first, the big boss man? He was glitching like up and down, like shaking.
I don't know.
When he was fighting me.
Not
But
that I
yeah,
know of.
that's some of those bugs are funny, but
yeah, The Last of Us is absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I don't like being closed-minded in the sense that, oh, nothing will ever beat this, nothing will be better than this, but
that's gonna.
you have to wonder if I wonder if a story can get better than The Last of Us did.
I'm sure some games will try. Maybe
Some games have gotten fairly close, like God of War's story. If Ragnarok's story is equally as good, the combination of God of War and Ragnarok together could compare.
Yeah.
Like God of War is very good, Spider-Man's very good with the DLC, but they don't compare an emotional standpoint than The Last of Us. Right. That's the main thing that differentiates it. You can have a connection to characters and relate, and you can have things that really emotionally connect to you. Like, because God of War did have some very emotional scenes.
Yeah.
But
to make it emotional when he doesn't show emotion.
Yeah. but it was particularly with Atreus.
Yeah.
And their dynamic is really good too. Kratos and Atreus have a fantastic dynamic in a similar way that Ellie and Joel do.
Yeah.
And in a gameplay type of way, Atreus is a better sidekick than Ellie is.
Right.
More recent game, like just the technology and stuff allowed him to be a better NPC partner. But in terms of story, I don't know if anything will ever connect to me emotionally the way The Last of Us did. I was almost devastated when I finished the game. I was like, wow. And then I proceeded to 6 months later play the game 3 or 4 more times in a row. Like back to back, just played it multiple times in a row.
Right.
It's just such a good game. So that's my number one. Yeah, and sorry we didn't get to talk. I mean, we got to talk a little bit about Skyrim, but
it's hard to talk about it without spoiling too much for you.
Yeah, and I am kind of sad that I haven't played it yet, but
you'll play.
It's one of those games that I'll play soon.
It might not be my number one when Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, though. If Elder Scrolls 6 is as good as...
If it's any good.
I think it will be. I don't think they...
Let's hope they don't Fallout 76 it.
No, they won't make it online. That's one thing I like about the Elder... If you want Elder Scrolls Online, go play Elder Scrolls Online.
That's fair, yeah.
The Elder Scrolls games are going to be strictly single player, but
yeah, so, I mean, I don't know if there's much to say. Like I said, I want to make, a multi-hour video explaining why in scripted, very meticulous detail my feelings about The Last of Us and why it is a perfect game to me.
Right.
But that's neither here nor there. This is not the point of the podcast episode. It's just, talk about it as my favorite game. Like, obviously, I have a very passionate opinions about The Last of Us. So,
yeah.
I guess this is probably the end of this episode. I don't know. There's not going to be another episode in April this month. Like I said, yeah, just a lot of very busy work for me. If you want to know a little bit more about that, check out the state of affairs for this month. Yeah, there's not going to be another one. There's going to be one episode in May. I don't know what that'll be. Might be Star Wars Retrospective number 2. We'll see. But there will probably also only be one episode in May for the same reason, because April's all going to be a busy month, so I won't have time to prepare much for May either.
Right.
But either way, this is the end of this episode. Come back on the first Friday of next month for another episode, whatever it may be. Check out Lane's channel, which is Gamer Joke. I'll have it linked.
I do live stream. I upload gaming videos and live stream every week. So
yeah, so I'll put a link in the description if you want to check out some of his gaming stuff. Maybe at some point I'll start to appear occasionally on a random live stream here or there.
If you're into funny moments or anything like that,
yeah, if you just want to watch some gaming live streams here on YouTube, go subscribe to his channel for that. So this is the end of this episode for the 4th time. Sorry, we're tired. It's nearly midnight when we're recording this.
Jeez. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's time for us to go to bed. So for now, I am Holden.
I'm Lane.
And this has been the Seasonal Podcast.
See ya.